I guess let's go ahead and get started, and then as people roll in, I will let them in. So welcome everyone to Teaching Talk 69. Today we're focusing on this whole week is Accessibility Week, and let me just share my screen because you maybe had a chance to just see some of the videos and some of the resources I've mentioned. So I want to just point out that back in the day, number 49, this was in June of 2021, Kelly walked us through the whole new staff resource guide. Again, it says DRC. I did change it in the title here. It says SAS. So that's like one key thing. We know we're shifting the name over. And so I just encourage you to look at that one because that has the whole resource guide. And then today, Kelly will go through specifically accommodations and what those involve, which I think is super important. And then I offered the video as well, kind of the framing video. And again, I say in the video, I am not an accessibility specialist, but I just realized over the years, like if you watch the end of the video and I do my like personal reflections thing, the short of that is in the span of 1 year, I became really accustomed just with cognitive disability. So working with a loved one who has since passed away from Alzheimer's dementia, and then continue to work with a loved one who has a glioblastoma multiforme, which is a stage 4 brain cancer. And in both of those conditions, one of the things, this for some reason is, I just wanted to, there we go. One of the things you discover is that everything like you knew about the world, like from just making a meal or getting in a car or being able to get, across the street or whatever, a lot of that stuff that you take for granted changes. And then the second thing I mentioned in my personal reflection section is that anyone that has any kind of cognitive disability, whether it's Tourette's or it could be a cognitive impairment, and there's a whole series if you visit neurologists, and I've been to multiple neurologists over the last few years, you discover that everything that you understood about the world, like how people communicate, and very basic things like someone asking for help or someone being able to tell a story. A lot of times if you have a cognitive impairment, all the rules you knew, like all that stuff changes. And so one of the things I started to discover was that I really needed to get more information to help my loved ones. Like what's the best way if you have someone who has dementia, Alzheimer's, how do you work with them? Particularly like it starts to take a toll on you as a caregiver. So you have to get used to, for example, with my loved one who had dementia, he would constantly tell the same story literally 30 times, like in the span of an hour. And so a lot of times it's not just knowing how to help someone, but it's also like developing your own patience. And a lot of people know, caregiver stress is something that's a real thing. So I saw this as an opportunity when I created this video and I talked to everyone on this call now to present and be available for this, to really use that as a point of emphasis for us, particularly as SAS has launched and the new space is open, to really say, we all have to do more. And that's why I say every week is Accessibility Week. It's just like if we have Equity Week, every week is Equity Week. And I wanted to bring the key players together this week to really say there's a lot of stuff that we can help you with resources and so forth, but you have to really know what you need to be able to do, what resources are available, the technologies, and then really dial down deep and make sure everything about your class, whether it's face-to-face, DE, or ISP, which I think the ISP component, that's going to change over time, particularly if we shift to Canvas. But it's really about gathering the information, knowing who's available to help, and then understanding what you need to do. So that's kind of like my welcome message for this week. And so Kelly's here today, Michael and Justin. So just kind of to indicate the players, Kelly is in charge of everything related to accessibility, but of course we all do our own jobs individually. Michael, of course, is our key point of contact with Canvas, and there's a ton of accessibility stuff that, we should address in Canvas. And then Justin as our new interim curriculum specialist. We were just talking the other day that there's a form that in the past has been reviewed by either Michael in his position or the DE committee. Now that's shifting to curriculum. So definitely want to establish the points of contact this week. And then the next step will be making sure that if you have a concern, you reach out to any of the players on campus. And then in my role, feel free to connect with me if you have any questions about like an assignment or an activity in a class and you want to know, well, how can I make that accessible? Like I was just thinking, I used to do an activity in class where, students were moving around and they were doing these mini plays. It was kind of focused on diversity. And I was thinking, like, I didn't at the time, but if I had a student who used a wheelchair or a walker, I would maybe have to set the room up in such a way to accommodate. So I want to also say before I stop talking that in the last teaching talk that Michael just offered, he mentioned doing this ahead of time. And I think one of the things that I didn't address in this welcome video is how to do some of this ahead of time, particularly if we know. I've had a number of students in my face-to-face classes. I was contacted prior to the class starting saying that Carla Johnston was going to come in and be an interpreter for that class. So I want to make sure we don't forget that, because I just now I'm thinking I didn't mention that in my welcome video. So in any case, I want to welcome everyone to this, and again, really stress the importance that every week is Accessibility Week. So I'm going to hand it off to Kelly. And Kelly, feel free to, let me stop my share here, and feel free to mention anything you would like here about the SAS, the new name, the new services in E106, anything that maybe I've been missing here in my welcome. So.
All right. That was pretty good, Scott. I don't know if you missed much. You covered so much. That was great. Can you guys see my screen? It's like a PDF.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess I'll start with just updates from our office. So the Disability Resource Center has changed names to Student Accessibility Services. And we've also changed location. So our high-tech lab is now located in E106. Mm-hmm. For accessible parking to get to this space or this half of campus, people, if you have a placard or if somebody needs a placard, they can apply through our office. It's not really apply, we have them, they just ask for one. And then, so we have a parking spot over by the University Center that comes straight into our office. And there's also several accessible parking spots in the roundabout where the bus stop is. So people can park there and access our office, or go from there and around towards the library around the new gate would be the fastest way to get into main campus. Yeah, Scott did a great job talking about how we need to be thinking about accessibility in our everyday lives and in our work, and from the very first step when it comes to building a course, whether that be the part where you walk into the classroom on the first day and look at how the chairs are set up and how wide the space is in between the chairs and the door, or working on your online class, developing your modules, making sure that your pages are accessible, clicking your POPTECH button. So really double checking that you have thought about accessibility around every corner. But what I'm going to talk about today, for the most part, is the academic accommodation notification. So when students come to us and they've been already determined eligible for services, we build with them an academic accommodation plan. And then as adults, different from what they experience in high school, where all of their teachers are already aware of their disability type and the accommodations that they're going to have to implement, we need the students' permission to notify each of their instructors each quarter. So we ask the student to fill out a notification request that says, these are the classes I'm in. These are the teachers that I have. I understand that I'm not required or responsible for telling my teacher what my disability is, but as a strong advocate for myself, I will discuss my accommodations with my instructor when needed. So we don't require our students to broach their teachers with their accommodations or with their disability specifically, but we do tell them that, you know, strong students and strong advocates for themselves talk to their teachers about their strengths and weaknesses. And if you want to make sure 100% that when you go in to take your test in Canvas, you get your extra time, you should be having that conversation with your instructor. So we do have those conversations with students about how to communicate with their instructors. But hopefully instructors can also use this tool as a way to communicate with the student on the front end as well. So after the student fills out the request, Nicole builds this form for them. It will say approved by Kelly or approved by Beth. So Beth, our learning disability specialist. It'll be one of the two of us that built the accommodation plan with the student. And then course number is going to go in here, instructor name, student name and ID number. And you're going to get this in your email. If you haven't already gotten one this quarter, I'm sure most people are like pretty familiar with what this looks like. It's an email that comes from me, Greiner at LTCC, and it says academic accommodation notification and then the quarter. So spring 2022, and then also the course number after that. And then the accommodations here are required. So if the accommodation is on here, it's a required accommodation. And we have our classroom/virtual learning environment accommodations. So this form has changed drastically, like so many times over the last 2 years, because we went to an online form in the first place. It used to be a paper form. And then about 6 months later, we went to a virtual learning environment form where it just had like your extended test time. We took out all these in-person services that we weren't using. And now we're kind of in a hybrid model of the form where it applies to all of the classes blanket. So if you teach Sociology 107 entirely online, you're going to see the same form that Walter Morris sees when he teaches volleyball in person. Okay. And so it really is your responsibility as a faculty member and the expert in your class in your field to look at this form and say, how can I use this information to best benefit the student in my setting and my classroom? The first thing we have on here is accessible furniture. So accessible furniture, for the most part, we install it in the classroom. It could be like somebody that uses a wheelchair only needs a table, so they can't get into those tables we have where you slide in and like the desk is attached. So they make that request to us, and then we have maintenance install whatever they need in the classroom, and we'll put a little tag on it that says reserved for whatever your class number is. And then what your responsibility as the faculty member is to make sure that nobody else sits in that chair, basically. Or to make sure that that student finds their way to the furniture that they've reserved. Preferential seating is something that a lot of our students don't really need here at our college, but some do, and it does apply. That would be where some students want to sit in the front of the room because they're low vision or because they're easily distracted. Some students want to sit in the front of the room because they read lips and they want to be closer to the instructor. There's several different reasons, and it can really relieve the anxiety for a student to know that they have the same seat in class every time. So just making sure that you have that conversation with the student saying, like, we're in a lecture hall full of chairs. Is there a spot that you want to make sure is reserved for you? Or would you like me to make sure there's always a spot in the front of the room or the back of the room for you? A person who has the next accommodation, stand, move, or leave the classroom periodically, they might want to sit close to the door. So always making sure that there's a seat close to the door for that person, and just having that conversation in private or over email and letting them know, like, I got your accommodations. I see that these are services that can help you. This is what our classroom looks like. Do you want me to reserve a chair for you? And then a lot of people have stand, move, or leave classroom because as we all know, we're different types of learners. Not everyone does their best work and can channel and focus in best when they're sitting in the desk. Some people benefit from sitting and standing. We have students with back issues or back pain that prefer to stand for periods of time or can't sit for periods of time. And then we do just have a conversation with all students about leave classroom periodically, that as an adult, they're responsible for their own education and their own experience here. And so if they're in class, they should not leave the classroom if there's important material being discussed. If they're going to miss information that they could have gained, that they're losing that if they leave the classroom, and that that's a choice that they're making. So if you're going to leave the classroom, if you need to leave the classroom, it should be brief and it should not be disruptive to other students. And we do have that conversation with students. Audio recorded lecture. This is something that I feel like is almost going away at Lake Tahoe Community College because our faculty does such a good job of recording their own stuff. They do a really, really great job of making sure that their materials are available on Canvas for students. But some students do need to audio record the lecture, and we have audio recorders here that they can use that are USB to load onto their computer, or we have instructions for them on our Accessibility Services Canvas page as to how to record from their computer. As a faculty member, you do have the right to ask a student to stop recording if you're going to be discussing sensitive material that may be harmful to other students to have recorded. So I know in some of the counseling classes where they talk about substance use and substance abuse, many people tell their own story in those classes, and they give personal, very sensitive examples. So that would be an appropriate time for a teacher to say to a student, I know you record in this class, would you mind turning that off? And the student should be receptive to that. And if they're not receptive, we've got a much larger issue, and that would be something that I would want someone to bring back to me as a faculty member. Use a personal electronic device. This could be typing on a student's computer, taking notes on a student's phone. Electronic devices are so varied now between phones and tablets and computers. What we mostly tell students is that if your instructor writes on the board and you can't keep up with that, it's a good idea to take pictures of the board with your cell phone. A lot of students benefit from that. We also do have a discussion about how this could be disruptive to your experience as well. Just like leaving the classroom too many times or getting up too much could be distracting and disruptive. It can be a positive tool, but if it's not used correctly, it's not going to help you. Same thing with cell phones. So a student using their cell phone in class should not take away from their ability to participate in group discussion, to answer questions when called on. A faculty member reserves the right to ask a student who is being disruptive what they're doing on their cell phone. If they're receiving calls, obviously that's not part of their accommodation to be calling and texting and emailing and stuff in class. So the same approach that you would take to a student who is not supposed to be using their phone in class would be used for a student who's not using this accommodation appropriately. And then we have next public speaking and planned participation. So this comes up sometimes in speech or classes that are really driven by group discussion. Students that have difficulty speaking in front of public or struggle with anxiety can really benefit from knowing when they're going to be called on during class, and also presenting speeches either privately to their instructor during an office hour or recording a speech ahead of time to present to the class that way. So if a student does have a public speaking and planned participation accommodation, you'll usually get an extra note from me at the bottom of the email that kind of gives you some tips and tricks as to how to handle that. Adjustment of printed materials. So typically this is going to be for a student that has varying vision related disabilities. That would be maybe materials that are printed on larger paper, materials that are printed in different fonts, or maybe even different color contrasts. And so with this one, you're going to want to send all of your printed materials. So for your face-to-face class, all of your handouts, all of your worksheets, anything you're going to give to your students, tests, quizzes, that stuff you want to bring to our office so that we can reproduce it for the student. It's not your responsibility as a faculty member to actually like create the large text or make sure it's printed on the color that the student wants. That's something that we can do if you provide us with the materials. And then if you're in an online class, you can encourage your students to use Helperbird, which is our software that customizes your web pages. So if a student is sensitive to certain colors or they're preferential to certain colors because of dyslexia or dysgraphia, then they can use those individualized features there. And then sign language interpreter. This is generally going to be for a person who is deaf and using American Sign Language. We will assign the interpreter and we will notify you if there's going to be an interpreter in your classroom. An important thing to make sure always when you're working with an interpreter is that you're still trying to build a connection with the student as if the interpreter almost isn't even there. So you want to, when you're using an interpreter, still refer to the student by their name, make eye contact with the student, if you're using an interpreter, you don't know American Sign Language, so you don't need to watch the interpreter. You really should be looking at and being attentive to your student. We also can do live sign language interpreting for online classes or virtually enhanced classes. So if you're in an online class and you're deaf and you need to meet with your teacher for office hours and you want to have a personal discussion with them face to face through the camera, we'll set up an interpreter to Zoom in with you. All right, closed captioning and transcripts. This button will be clicked for any student who is deaf or hard of hearing. However, you should just pretend and imagine that this button is always clicked for every student that you have, because we should always be giving the option to have closed captions or transcripts to all of our students. Live captioning and transcription is a little bit different. So this would be in the classroom setting. We would provide the student with a transmitter and their instructor with a lapel microphone, and then we will send the sound off to a live transcriber and they'll type the transcript into the student's computer. So that's something that we can set up in the classroom. And then as far as live captioning, if you're doing Zoom stuff, you can use Zoom captions. But if you have a deaf or hard of hearing student, we do have funds to provide live captioning, which is just a more high quality, more immersive experience for that person. So never hesitate to ask me to hire a captioner. We can always hire a captioner. I just need to know. And typically I'll know before the teacher does, I think. But if you ever get that request, that's fine. Just send the student to me. All right. And then we have, how am I doing? 25 minutes. Okay. Testing accommodations. And I will talk, I also have the proctor form pulled up here. So we've made a pretty drastic shift on our campus from when I first started here in 2019, the Library Teaching and Learning Center, and really Melanie was doing all of the proctoring for the entire campus, and they were proctoring hundreds of tests a week. And we just really don't have the bandwidth for that here at this college. So we are now in student accessibility services overseeing the proctoring for students with academic accommodations. And if proctoring is needed for a makeup exam or a student in sports or some other reason, we're asking that the faculty member either handle it themselves during their office hours or that they contact the instruction office to work with a proctor outside of our office. All right, and then for testing accommodations, we have extended test time and the amount of time here. Our go-to time is typically double, just because it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter how much time we give students, but a lot of students don't use all of the time, but they need that feeling of not being pressured by the clock. And that's really what it is for a lot of people that have test anxiety or are nervous about testing or have learning disabilities that cause them to, feel lack of confidence in testing. It's really about just knowing that you're not going to run out of time. So that's why we typically go with double, I would say, even though students don't necessarily always use all of that time. And so that's a question I get from faculty a lot is like, well, it only took them a half an hour, so why did we give them 3 hours? And it's not about the 3 hours, it's about the ability to take the pressure off the clock. All right, and then we have breaks. And so we do have a hired proctor, and I know a lot of people are concerned about the privacy of their testing materials. And so when students do take a break, they're not allowed to access any of their stuff like their backpack or their cell phone or their computer. And they can leave the room to go to the bathroom, but they can't take any of the testing materials with them. Some instructors like to break their tests up, which is great. I think that's fine. If you want to say, okay, here's the first 20 questions, the second set of questions, and the third set of questions, give the student the first set. And if they need to take a break, we'll ask them if they need to take a break before we give them the second set. So that's something sometimes teachers don't want the student to see all 80 questions and then take a break and then go to the bathroom and stuff. And that's fine. We can break tests up that way. And then speaking of breaking up tests, adjustment of exam length. So what this accommodation is for students that have limited stamina or become anxious and exasperated. It would be if you give 100-question exam, maybe this student can really only handle 20 questions at a time. And maybe that 20 questions is going to take them 2 or 3 hours. So having the discussion with the student that has adjustment of exam length of, okay, we have a big midterm coming up. It's about 50 questions. If you're on Canvas, you could say, the first section is going to be open to you for like 3 days, and the second section is going to be open to you for this amount of time afterwards. And so breaking tests up into multiple days or multiple testing periods, so the student has the ability to recover and come back fresh again. All right, a distraction reduced setting is what we provide with the proctoring. So instead of going to class, the student will come to our office, and then right now, due to the construction, we're just kind of like reserve a room anywhere. So you might have to take your test in the library. You might have to take your test in the theater. You might have to take your test in the university center. But we're going to guarantee that it's distraction reduced, it's far away from the construction sounds, and that you're getting a quiet space with less students. A lot of students benefit from the distraction reduced setting in the way that when you show up to take a big test and everyone is like in the room studying and looking at the textbook and clicking their pencils and asking each other questions like, oh, what do you think is going to be on this? And oh, did you study this part? Like, that's really nerve-wracking and anxiety producing for some of our students. So just removing themselves from the other students that are feeling anxiety about test taking can really benefit them. And then private testing space is generally for students that talk out loud during their test or talk to themselves, like typically throughout the day. And so those tests they'll actually take in our office for the most part. We've got one room in here that will be reserved for testing. And if we have somebody in this room, then we also have a DRC study room in the library. And that room is wildly underused. SAS study room, huh? We're gonna have to change that sign. There's a long list of signage that needs to change. But yeah, having that study room in the library also for students that just need private space a lot of times, and recognizing that we also have a lot of students that are parents or live with their parents or have just hectic home lives and don't have quiet space. We want to be able to carve that out for them. So we do have that in the library. All right, memory aid. This is a rare one that I think a lot of people struggle with. This is typically for people with acquired brain injury that struggle recalling information that they do know. So typically on a memory aid, we will send a notice to the instructor, and then it's the student's responsibility to get with the instructor before the test during their office hours or to make an appointment to build or review a memory aid. So a memory aid might be a piece of paper that has rhymes on it or pictures on it or different colors that remind the student of different topics. It's not a cheat sheet. It's not an answer sheet. It's supposed to be something that triggers the student's memory. And reviewing that with the instructor is the responsibility of the student. And I think sometimes that's why we have students that shy away from using it. And I think it would be great if our instructors could be proactive on the front end and say, you know, I see that you have this memory aid accommodation. I have some ideas of how you could apply that. Let's see, adaptive software. This is typically going to be like screen reading related. So for a student that is low vision, it might be for a student that is using our Kurzweil reading software during a test, so to have something read to them. We ask that the student participate in training sessions with us on that software so that it doesn't impede their testing experience. So if you've never used the Kurzweil software and you've never had it read to you, you probably shouldn't try it for the very first time on your midterm. And that's something that we talk to students about. So these are only for students that have practiced the software both in our office and at home and are confident that it would benefit them in a testing situation. And then scribe and use of computer keyboard would typically be for students that have sloppy handwriting or some kind of disability impeding their mobility or ability to hold a writing utensil. So what we do is we just load a test onto the computer. We put the computer on airplane mode and we have the student take it either in PDF or Word or something like that, or and you'll be notified beforehand to provide those materials to us. We will hire an in-person scribe if somebody needs a scribe. We've never needed a scribe, so honestly, I might be the scribe if we ever need one. Calculator, this is basic function calculator, so plus, minus, multiply, and divide would be the only features, and we would provide that calculator in the testing room. And then sign language interpretation of instructions. Typically, our deaf students that are using American Sign Language are not speaking in their first language. They're not reading in their first language. So English is not the first language of a deaf person typically that uses American Sign Language. And so in order to improve their understanding of the information, we can provide a sign language interpreter that will only interpret instructions and test questions. So they would read the test question and then they would sign it back to the student. This is mainly and majorly because syntax is really different in American Sign Language. And there's a lot of like variations in vocabulary to where the student might read a word and not know what it is, but have it signed to them and know exactly what they're talking about. And then we have the other category. And this is my favorite part. And I love to tell students that like we're DSPNS and we get the other box and we can put anything we want in there. And like that is the unique thing about our services is that really when students come to us and they request something highly individualized, we try our best to provide that. So your other box might have something short. It might be full of details. If it's full of details, you're probably going to get another email from me. And then just the statement at the bottom is that students and faculty are really responsible for working out the accommodations on their own. We recommend them, and then you're the expert. You are the person that knows what happens in your classroom. So if you have questions as to how to apply the material, I can answer your questions, but it truly is the faculty's responsibility to make sure that the student is receiving these services. I just can't. I wish I could go to class with every single student and raise my hand and tell their teacher what they need, but that's just not the job. But I really encourage faculty to work with me on different ideas as to how we can apply accommodations in unique settings. We can purchase materials for students. We had a hard of hearing student that took a volleyball class and they couldn't hear the score. They were just yelling out the score, and there were 4 different games happening at one time. So we bought scorecards, and we had scorecards in the gym in 48 hours. And that was an accommodation that we were really easily able to provide just because the right person came and asked for it. So just asking questions, constantly looking around every corner for ways that you can improve your students' experience. And
I was just going to, real quick, just to go back to the form, I just love how comprehensive you are on this. Just as far as testing accommodations, one thing I wanted to know, just to get on the video for faculty, a lot of us have, like if we have a face-to-face class, a lot of us have actually moved to giving all our exams and quizzes in Canvas. And for me, it's been a game changer because I get more time with the students in class. And then I feel like, because I had this issue years ago, I thought I'm doing my DE version of a 102 class and they get to do open book. And then I'm like, well, why do my face-to-face students then do closed book? So I shifted everything to DE, to Canvas. So this is kind of maybe a basic question, but so if I do that, then certain things like breaks, for example, if breaks are marked for my class, do I need to do anything more? I mean, are there certain things that will obviously be accommodated because it's shifted to Canvas? So can you think of any tips on that kind of scenario?
So for online classes, for breaks, so we give double time and we tell the student that they need to build their breaks into their double time.
Okay.
So it is helpful if you can set your stuff to be like opened and closed, like not just one attempt, you go in and start your test and then you can never get back into it. If
Okay.
a student can get a couple questions through and stop and pause and close it and come back to it later, that's super beneficial for them. But they are supposed to build their breaks into their double time when they're taking tests online. And
Okay.
I really like that idea, Scott, and that you're saying really like if the expectation is that the online students be able to use the book and stuff, then you're having that same expectation for your students in the classroom. And really in the classroom setting, reevaluating, like we talk about a lot in our faculty trainings, like why are we giving these tests
Mhm.
and what is the intended outcome of test taking? And the intended outcome should like not be to put the student through a stressful testing experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's really something that our services remove from the testing experience for students is just a lot of academic trauma and anxiety around testing.
And particularly with, post COVID, all the stuff I've been reading is that PTSD and a lot of issues related to stress because of COVID, like it's probably going to increase the number of students that are struggling in our classes and maybe needing accommodations. So I think like we have to have this all on our radar now, just because I think we're in such a unique time in history right now.
Yeah. And I really just think that in our office, we use this form as a way to notify faculty. And I think that faculty should use this form as a tool to communicate with their students. They should print it out or they should CC them on. Like, this is not a secret form. The students know that they have these accommodations, and the faculty member should be sharing with them that they received their accommodations, that they applied their accommodations, and that these are ways that they can get their unique services in each of their classes, and showing them this form and saying physically, like showing them a copy and seeing it in front of you and having this communication and this discussion. And really like that for students, that's huge. That breaks down the stigma of I'm scared about my disability and I don't want to talk to my teacher about what I need. It teaches our students how to be strong advocates for themselves. It congratulates them a little bit, it inspires them to do it again. When you ask for help and you get what you need, you're more likely to ask your next teacher for help and get what you need. And having these deep and meaningful conversations with our students about their needs and how they can best be applied in our classes is really like the main point.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you. No, I just great information. It's just great having such clarity on all these areas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good one. Maybe we
Yeah.
should do this one like once a year.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah, and we'll have to do the guide again. And then so everybody should have in their email the Student Accessibility Services Guide for supporting faculty and staff. It has a very detailed outline of each accommodation. So if you're curious about how something you can apply something in your class, you should look here first. If you ask me first, I'm typically going to copy and paste something from this book and send it to you. And then just one other form I want to show you guys. Hang on, I'm running into Michael's time, and what he has is very important. But I want everyone to be familiar with this form as well. This is our testing accommodation form. So this is going to be if a student has requested a distraction-reduced setting outside of class, a private testing space, and extended time with a proctor. We're hiring a part-time hourly proctor to actually sit and proctor the test. And so you're going to get this form from me and you're going to fill it out as the faculty member. So well, this part will be filled out for you, but what the test instructions are. Is it closed note? Is it open note? Are they allowed some kind of note card? Calculators for math and class time allowed. So what is the regular amount of time allowed? And then instructor contact. Please do not put your office phone number because the odds of you being in your office while you're proctoring your class at the time that the student is taking the test is like really unlikely. So a cell phone number or email is typically preferred. Or if you know what classroom you're going to be in, the proctor will walk the student to your classroom or the proctor will come and ask you questions if the student has questions. So just be prepared to see this form and to be seeing it from our office more often as students are using these testing accommodations. That's it. That's what I got.
Wow, that was really good. I think you're right. We need to do this more frequently and just keep people, up to speed on changes. And I think, some of the questions I get from faculty about accommodations, I think just continuing to communicate with everybody and say, hey, we have like a pro staff looking over this stuff, because I think sometimes the perception is, particularly with the extended time. And for me, again, I've made that a non-issue because I do it all on Canvas, and I usually will have like 24 hours, and so that's generally enough time. Of course, the double time would be 48. But even if you're not doing that, I feel like it's important for faculty to know that it's not just like anyone can come in and ask. The whole diagnosis process. And again, I know a lot about this with the process. For example, we had to get a family placard for our car, and it's for all these things that you do in everyday life, there's a ton of specialists, like medical accommodations. And so maybe if we just continue to communicate that with faculty, because sometimes I feel like they don't understand what you guys do in SAS, and they feel like, oh, it's just anyone who walks in gets an accommodation. You do a series of tests, and I don't even have the basic knowledge of what you do, but I know it's very extensive. So.
Right. Yeah. And we evaluate documentation, and we take recommendations from other medical and mental health service providers. So really, we're trying to build a program that works for each individual student. We try not to blanket our accommodations. That's why the forms are different. That's why each student gets a little something different. There was something I wanted to tell you. You sparked my memory, and now I've forgotten.
About faculty extended time, faculty questions. I don't know. Maybe I'll come back to you. It can come back to you. So. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. I appreciate that. And again, oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when it comes to diagnosing, so I want to plug, and I want all of you to go out and plug for me, please. We are in dire need of giving some learning disability assessments here at this college. So we provide, Beth and I both are learning disability specialists, and we provide the Woodcock-Johnson achievement test and the WACE, which is there's an achievement and an aptitude test. And then we use those two tests and we compare them against like a baseline that the chancellor's office has given us to provide services. So we're not diagnosing the person with a disability, but what we're doing is we're saying the chancellor's office says that your aptitude and your ability are within this threshold, and we can provide services to you. The testing, it takes about 2 appointments, and it typically is just for students who are struggling, like people that come in here and they're just like, I hate math, and I've sucked at math since I was in like first grade, and I'm just like not good at it, and I don't like it. Like, great, let's give you a learning disability assessment, and let's give you some extra services that we can provide. I would say the only students that we typically don't provide this kind of test to are students that have like underlying mental health conditions. So like if you have active bipolar, like active schizophrenia, we're not going to give you a learning disability assessment, or even like autism. If you're on the spectrum, we're not going to give you a learning disability assessment because we can already serve you in that way. But just for your typical students in class that are struggling or can't complete all the reading or just turn in every single assignment like a day or 2 days late, like those kinds of students can really benefit from this testing and can really benefit from the services, even though no one in their life has ever told them they have a disability before. And we used to give out a ton of these tests here at the college, and COVID really killed our testing process. And we would love to give more tests. We have hundreds of them, and we want to give them to students. So send them our way.
Great. I'll mention that. We have some of our technology workshops coming up. I'm going to mention that in those workshops for the students who attend. So it might be good to announce that. Yeah.
And like early alert, when you're doing your early alert to counseling, maybe you're also reaching out to that student and saying, we have this testing process. Maybe you would be interested in.
Great. Perfect.
Well, wonderful. Kelly, thank you. That was really comprehensive, and I'm just glad that... No, it's not. And by the way, we can always do more workshops. We never have, there's always a a Tuesday available, so we can do more of these. And then generally, your office hours in SAS right now, those are posted on the door for the services.
Yeah, we're kind of four.
Okay, great. Perfect. Super. Okay. Well, let's thank you, Kelly. So, Michael, and we'll jump to you, and then just to mention what I covered in the welcome video, some different stuff. I did go over Helperbird, which I think Helperbird is super cool what it does, and then the stuff I talked about in the video with Canvas, I really tried to clarify like the Pope Tech accessibility checker from the other one. And then I also mentioned, because Treva had questions about alt text, I did a lot of experimenting this week with alt text and immersive reader. So whatever you wanted to cover, if you wanted to share the screen, if you wanted me to share some stuff, however you wanted to cover, kind of broad overview of what accessibility issues we might look out for inside of Canvas.
Sure. And what I would like to say, because I'm always very transparent and open with everybody, I was diagnosed late in life with generalized anxiety disorder. You might see it when I play with my beard and things like that. And when I was going through school, nobody, unless you had a physical disability, it was kind of overlooked. Everybody had ADHD or ADD when I was in school. They didn't really look at it deeper than that. Then into my higher education, I had the troubles with testing. I didn't have troubles with, writing a report, things like that. And I kind of went through my education later, not completely late in life, but later in life. And I was getting a 3.5 in my bachelor's program. And it was kind of like people said, well, you're getting a 3.5. What does it matter? I have every right to get a 4.0. And if accommodations would have gotten me a 4.0, I have every right for that. So struggling with that. And then I really found out how bad the whole testing thing that we're talking about was when I got into my master's program, because you hardly take a test in grad school. It's all papers. It's all, these big, long fact-finding things like that. I got a 4.0 throughout my master's program. So the harder it got, supposedly harder it got, the better I did. And it wasn't because of the challenge. It was because of the type of assessment I was being given. So I really have been, ever since I got into education as an instructor and then as an instructional designer and now to this position, everybody will, there are people, not everybody, there are people that will abuse every type of help that is out there. But not everybody is abusing that help. So what I really wanted to go over today was the reason for Pope Tech, how it helps the faculty member, not just the student receiving accessibility accommodations. And then kind of some of the real basic things that come up in my position as far as moderating quizzes, things like that. So we'll do this super quick, and I can share my screen. One of the things, we'll just start with the moderating. A lot of people are like, what do I do that says that they get double time? And it's all, we have freedom as faculty members to design our assessments the way we want to. One thing that I've done, and I've talked about this with Kelly before I was in this position where I was just faculty, as an online faculty member, basically what you run into that situation is really the captioning with Zoom and the testing accommodations as far as time limits, things like that. What I've done is, and kind of to your point, Scott, about, the open book with an online test. In my time as an instructional designer, I had a ton of pushback from faculty. Well, what do I do to make sure my students aren't cheating with an open book or with the internet? Or, I don't want to use a proctoring, Respondus lockdown browser or something like that. But how do I stop that? They didn't like my answer. I said, you do what I did and you make your tests so hard that you need to use the internet. You need to use your book in order to pass the test. You don't just take the publisher's created content, because all the answers are in the book if you're using the publisher's test banks. That's not a very popular answer for a lot of people, but it is the truth. The other thing I will say is kind of the outlook on testing. In our careers, we're not given one opportunity to succeed, and if we don't succeed in that one opportunity, we fail and we're fired. We get multiple times to perfect our craft. Why should education be any different than that? So I give my students, there's ways to set up a test where you can give them multiple attempts. Not you give an unlimited if you want, but in my situation, I give multiple attempts, and I take I have Canvas take the average of all those attempts, and that's the score that they get. So I'll give 3 attempts. We keep the average of your 3 scores. So there's ways to mitigate all these different things. It's kind of like what I found in this accessibility world in quizzes and stuff is it opened a can of worms, that it's bigger than just the one step. It's okay, well, now that we've solved this, now there's this. Anyway, what I will show is how to moderate a quiz to give that extra time or multiple attempts to specific students if that's what SAS and the student comes up with in their plan that they need. So I'm in this module 1 quiz, pick any quiz. And over here on the right side is moderate this quiz. When you click on this was a horrible class to pick because there's no students in it. Let me see if I can find one.
Doesn't have a test student?
This one doesn't have the test student. I think I moved away from that, so I will go back to that course, which is.
And by the way, I'll blur in post any names so we won't have FERPA issues. So feel free to
Gotcha.
put it up there and I'll blur later.
I think this course has the test student. We'll go to moderate the quiz. Oh, we don't have to do anything with this. And Richard Sargent, he's a faculty member, so
Oh, nice.
we
Okay.
just added this, so we're good with this one. So here it says attempt, time, and score. Over here is a little pencil. It says change user extensions. Oops. This is a quiz. Actually, why this one isn't working is because I've already had it set up to where there is no time limit. So
Okay.
real fast, we'll go back, edit, and allow multiple attempts, quiz average. Attempts. On a time limit, let's say you're giving them 2 hours to complete this test. Now, when we come over here and click on that pencil on the right side, you get this box that says student extensions. One of the options is extra time on every attempt. So everyone already gets 120 minutes.
Mhm.
As Kelly said, the standard time is double time. So you will just add another 120 minutes.
Mhm.
This is kind of confusing. You have to add 120, not 240, because everyone already gets 120 minutes and you're giving extra time.
It's on top of, yeah.
Yeah, so it's on top of it.
Right.
So when you save it, you can see now that the test student gets 120 extra minutes on each attempt. Now, if you would like to give them another attempt, you can also click on this. Let me see. I'm not sure why in this situation. Oh, I know why. They also got multiple attempts on that quiz.
Okay.
So I needed to set that as well too. Not allow multiple attempts.
Mhm.
Go ahead and save it. Now when we moderate this quiz and click on our test student, extra attempts comes up as well.
Mhm.
So if you want to give a student one extra attempt, now this goes beyond accessibility. This goes to if maybe a student, if you have it set up to, you have to stay in that quiz until it's finished.
Mhm.
Let's say a student's internet goes down, just for a second. It will kick them out of that quiz. You have it set. That is the way you will give them another attempt if you so choose to give that student, believe that their internet really did go down and you wanted to give them that extra attempt. The other thing that I wanted to go over real quick is Pope Tech. Now, I love Pope Tech. We used to have something called You Do It.
Mhm.
We got rid of You Do It because what happens with You Do It is, in my talk previously, we were talking about copying courses from one term to another term. With You Do It, it basically laid your alt text, things like that, over the top of your course, like a transparency, really dating myself, but like an overhead projector transparency. What Pope Tech does is it actually adjusts the HTML of your course. Now, I'm not going to get into any more technical jargon than it adjusts the HTML, meaning when you make your changes, let's say in this course that we're in, we can see now, and you copy this content into your next term's course, the changes will stay with it. That was a big barrier for faculty that really, I would love to make these changes, but I'm not going to do it every single solitary time I change this, or I teach this course. So we will just look at one of my pages. And now You Do It is available for pages, quizzes, discussions, and assignments. So every Canvas feature basically that you have your students utilizing, You Do It is a part of it, and it will go in and run the accessibility checker for each one of those specific types of Canvas features. So this is just, I teach with OER, so I can copy and paste my textbook pages directly into my Canvas course. Let's say I want to make sure that this course is accessible for all students. What I will do is I will come over here to edit,
Mhm.
click on edit, and down here at the bottom is the Pope Tech button.
Mhm.
We click on this, a little deal pops up, and it tells us there's 3 errors and there's 8 alerts, and it gives you a list of all of them. All you have to do is click on the arrow, says missing alternative text. We click here, and it gives us the option in this little pop out to change it directly. So if I want to type, anything that test alt text, and then I say apply. Now it goes to the second error, which is another alt text. Let's say that this one doesn't really pertain to the content of this page. It's just a decorative image. There's 2 theories of interpreting how you proceed from this. One of them is that when a student's using a screen reader, if it's decorative, it's best to mark it as decorative so they understand that it's not part of the course. The other train of thought is that student has every right to understand the decorative image as well. So this really boils down to your own, how you interpret this. If you do want to mark it as decorative, there's a little box, you have the alternative text, or I can mark it as decorative. As soon as I click that.
Sometimes, Michael, let me interject. What I do, I just finished a presentation where I used a lot of clip art, and it was cute. It was definitely for the intention of being cute, but it applied to every slide. There was like a slide about funding, and there were like people standing on coins looking at like bank data. And so in my alternative text, I started it off by saying decorative clip art, and then putting a colon and describing the clip art. So if you do feel that way and you do feel like it's something of value that like enriches the experience, you can also put in the alt text like decorative, like this is not a chart of the brain.
And then real quick to mention, I covered in my video, but when you insert an image using the image feature in the rich content editor, what's cool about that is if you use the stock images that are provided through an external service, it automatically does the alt text for you, and PowerPoint does it for you. So I think it's pretty cool that that's being built into, like, we'll probably get to the day inside of Canvas where this image of the brain, it's amazing how much through artificial intelligence a computer can recognize what's in your image. So we're getting really better, and I feel like the automation of that is going to help definitely with this in the future.
Correct. Other than alternative text, and kind of to Kelly's point, a lot of times what I'll do is use like little check marks next to certain headings or something like that on like a introduction and objectives for a module. I'll just put the little check marks. And that kind of goes back to that. Really, what I do is I weigh how much information's on that page, how many of those things that I'm doing. And I don't want a student to lose track. So if it is something like Kelly's saying, where it is meant to be cute and you want that student to experience it, add that decorative text and then kind of explain it. If it's a check mark and you've got 19 check marks on your page, that's when I'll actually just mark it as decorative, call it a day. And my students that have used a screen reader know the difference, because you can do that decorative text, or you can just describe what that decorative picture is. And then when they actually see you click decorative, oh, they're okay, I don't need to pay attention to that. The other big mistake that I see people do when they're designing a page, especially a page in Canvas, is not utilizing headings.
Yeah.
They'll just make something bold and make the font bigger, and they'll call that a heading. That's fine if you don't have a problem with your vision. When you're using a screen reader, you need to know those headings, especially if you have to go back for studying purposes and you just need to study this one thing. You can quickly move through the headings. You have to literally let the screen reader read the whole page to you over again. Excuse me. So the nice thing about Pope Tech is it will tell you where you have problems with your headings. And I don't have a whole lot of problems with my headings because these are actually, I used an old one just so I could show you the difference between, if you see right here, this one actually changes to heading 2. Same size font, same everything, but this is a paragraph. What the screen reader is going to do is it's going to actually say heading 2, and it's going to just read this to the student. They don't know that there's an actual shift in maybe a topic or something like that. So this is things that Pope Tech actually helps you with. And as you can see, it lists which things are actually set as headings and which ones aren't. So that's just an easy little trick. I will say I met with our OEI instructional design representative last week, and Pope Tech is actually improving their product, and you'll actually be able to do a global snapshot of your course rather than go page to page to page to page. Because right now, I was advocating for us to get a separate accessibility checker that will check your whole course all at once and note where your problems are. This doesn't do it. You actually have to go page by page by page right now. Pope Tech is actually going to be improving their project. I don't have an ETA on when that's going to happen, but you'll actually be able to check your entire course with a click of a button and make those changes. as you go.
That's really impressive because I think, Pope Tech's great. I think it's really useful. And again, it's something that, kind of muscle memory, just we need to just put on our radar, like you were saying in our last talk, the week before when you're getting your class going, just make sure to do all those checks. And a real common one are dead links. We find that all the time where, your YouTube link dies and you have to go in and maybe manually do that. So I just feel like it's just part of something we should be doing every quarter before we teach, and don't assume, hey, I imported this class from the past, it's going to be the same. It's like, no, it could really, oh, Kelly, thanks. Yeah, she's saying she has to jump to another meeting. So I think Pope Tech's awesome. So.
And I mentioned something I completely forgot to mention in our last talk was about the broken links.
Yeah.
There is, and I'll do this real fast so we can get going here. But in Canvas, if you go to settings, over here is the validate links and content. Click this and then start link validation. I'm not going to do it right now, but one thing I will say about Canvas that they have not fixed, and I hope one day they do, and you were mentioning YouTube videos, Scott, is Canvas does not, depending on your internet speed, connections, how many people, like I said in my last talk, how many people are actually on Canvas at that time. One bad thing about the link validator, and especially with YouTube, is Canvas shoots out a ping. And if YouTube doesn't respond fast enough, it will say that the link is broken.
Yeah.
So it's very important, especially with YouTube, to manually, the one nice thing about the link validator is it puts them all on one page so you can quickly go through and check them yourself. You don't have to find them in every page and do it. But it is important, if it does say that the YouTube link is broken, to go in and check it yourself, because sometimes YouTube just doesn't respond fast enough for Canvas. So that's an important thing to know. I've ran link validator multiple times in the same course, and it would show different amounts of links were broken. And that's how I discovered that their link validator isn't a perfect feature in their product.
Yeah, that happens too with if you're in the rich content editor and you want to use the icon to insert a YouTube video, sometimes you want that really nice thumbnail view, the 3 different sizes. Sometimes I will search, it's a public video that I've created and it just doesn't find it. So the way I do it is the less attractive way. You just put the link in, whatever the URL is of the YouTube video, hit return. But, the thumbnail it generates from that technique is not as nice. So I think there's something with YouTube via Canvas that just gets messed up. Maybe like you're saying, when it's trying to validate or find that, it times out or something. I don't know. It's a little annoying. So
yeah, it is. And that's kind of another, we could keep talking all day, but, really adding those YouTube links into Canvas rather than just sharing the link is a very important course design best practice as well. It's always best to keep the student in Canvas in your course rather than take them to youtube.com and have it do it that way. Yeah. It's easier to keep a student, on track. They don't see their list of suggested videos over to the side, because the suggested videos are things they're interested in.
Yeah.
And as a student, would you rather watch instructional, informative video that might not be the most exciting? Or would you rather watch your, gaming video or something like that shows you a bunch of tips on that? So that's just another best practice real quick to share.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you, Michael. And I know the last 2 here are covering Canvas and now jumping a little bit into Ellume. And I know it's fairly quick, but like Kelly was saying, we can do more of these workshops. This is not intended to be the one-stop shop for anything accessibility, but an opening conversation, and particularly getting together, some of the key players here so we know what the issues are to look out for. So Michael, thank you again. And you did 2 of these, amazing content. So while we have Justin here, I just wanted to mention our new interim curriculum specialist, we were communicating recently, and I mentioned this in my welcome video. Now eLumen is being slow here, just when we need it. I mentioned in the eLumen or in the welcome video that in terms of eLumen, and if you need to get to eLumen, you can access that through your Passport login. That there is a section, depending on how you log in, some of us have different levels of access. There's a section that has traditionally been handled through Michael's position and also the DE. It's had different names, but basically the DE committee, if you will. Some of that is changing, and so I don't know exactly the changes that are coming. But in the past, what we've typically done is, within eLumen, not on the course outline of record. Well, it's part of it, but it's typically done as an attachment. So this is where, in the past, we've used this through the curriculum committee. And then what happened in the past was, once you did your disability accommodation information, this would actually go through Michael's position, kind of as a coordinator, and then it would come to the DE committee. I think what's happening now, and we can kind of leave this as a question mark because there are some processes changing via curriculum, is I think the curriculum committee is doing, I think, Michael, you told me this too, right? They're doing the whole DE form. Is that your understanding?
As far as I understand, I was tagged on a lot of these. And then when I went to instruction, they said that someone else is worrying about that right now.
Okay.
So I just left it at that.
Yeah.
We may need another training for this because I think possibly, this will change. This is the old version. I'm saying old because this is back when I did my online addendum for Anthro 101. And this was always what we did. And I believe what happened was with that checklist, I'm trying to remember here, title frames, I think, yeah, some of this is waived. So this is certainly part of some of the accessibility. But very often you were just checking to say, based on reading this statement about the ADA and all the legalese here, is it true that this course is accessible? And if you checked no or yes, I guess it's actually worded, is there any aspect of the course that cannot be made accessible? So you would typically check no if the course is accessible. I think then what happened, and Kelly's off the call here, is that then the DRC, now the SAS, would address that and then sort of make a conclusion. And then it might get shot back to department chair or the part-time faculty if they were writing this course. So I think what we want to say today, just to kind of give an endpoint, but really a continuation to future workshops, is to say, if you have questions, you can always reach out to your department chair or the dean, Kelly and Beth in the SAS, Justin coming on board as our new interim curriculum specialist, more full-time going into the end of this month in April. There are a lot of folks on campus always available to help. If you're in instruction, Lori, Sarah, and Kelsey can help you with some of this. Reach out to me as well, to Michael, because some of this is changing. I don't want to give you the wrong information, so we'll say, there is a process in place, we know today, but what that looks like in the future could change a little bit. And I don't know, Michael, if you had other thoughts on that, or if you're kind of waiting to see what happens with the your involvement with the DRC and the online addendum to the course.
Yeah, and that you're right about that wording. It is a little wonky.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't say, is it accessible? It says, can it be made accessible?
Right,
So
right.
technically, if your course is 100% inaccessible, but it can be made
Yeah.
accessible, you have every right to check the no box. I
Yeah.
will say one thing for accessibility that is a big issue. We've always been trained to think that saving things as a PDF is the best practice.
Yeah.
Only because PDFs were able to be read by computers, any type of cell phone, anything like that. That has changed in the accessibility realm.
Yeah.
PDFs are extremely hard to remediate, and by remediate, I mean, if it's not accessible, make it accessible. It can take up to 4 hours to remediate a single PDF, depending on how long and how screwed up it is. The best practice for that is if you can put it in a Canvas page, put it in a Canvas page first and foremost, If you can't put it in a Canvas page for whatever reason that I can't see, make it a Word document, because Canvas makes the pages and Word documents available in all formats automatically.
Yeah.
So where a screen reader can read it, it can be translated in audio without you doing a thing. You just have to click on the multiple formats and pick which format you want, and it tells. I mean, it will actually translate your Canvas page or your Word document into a Braille.
Yeah.
The Braille hardware technology. So no more PDFs moving forward. And it's not like, I'm saying you need to go back and spend however many weeks changing your course to where you don't have any PDFs, but moving forward with new course design, if you can avoid a PDF, please do so.
That's really good advice. And I was saying in the welcome video, we didn't really cover accessibility in PDFs. So one of the things I want to investigate in the future is, can we take some of the old PDFs that are just vital articles? Because you often can't, depending on the format, you want to cut and paste, put that into a Canvas page, you might actually get these weird ASCII characters. So what I would love to investigate is via Helperbird or maybe another technology we could invest in, if we could do some work on the back end helping faculty to translate a PDF, even one that might have been scanned as an image, which are the worst, into OCR, into the optical character reader technology. Because a lot of the new PDFs being produced today, you likely will be able to do a cut and paste. But if it's an old one that was scanned as an image, then you need OCR, and really good OCR that's going to go through and identify. Now, I will say there was an app. I can't remember what it was. There's a new app out there, a note-taking app, and you can test it on your own handwriting on a book, and it will take, the OCR is so amazing, it will get like 100% of the words right. So I'm hopeful that we can maybe invest via a grant or one of our positions in something that could help with PDFs, because I feel like there are probably some PDF issues out there that we're not aware of, and something we need to address from an accessibility
standpoint. For
It
sure.
definitely is. And I will say, when I was an instructional designer, part of my duties were to remediate courses, and some PDFs like you're talking about, where it's a scan of an actual, or a copy, somebody just went to the copy machine, copied it, and then scanned it, which happens a lot with older textbooks from the library. Some of them were 100% impossible. And we were using Adobe products, which makes PDFs, which made the original PDF file extension. Even Adobe couldn't OCR those. And like, that's what I was saying, as far as manually doing it, setting the reading order and things like that. And especially when you do a text or, a book, you get that curve at the binding. And we experimented with a screen reader. And I mean, for a student that needs that accommodation, you just are literally marginalizing them marginalizing them into failure, basically, for that. So.
And one thing I'll say about that too, if any of you, we've sometimes talked about going to Scrib to get materials. There's often open source materials there. Kind of varies, scrib.com. One of the cool things there is you can often download a text as an EPUB. You can download it, I don't think ever as a Word or TXT file. But if you're choosing between like a PDF, you could just download the PDF, start working with that. You're going to very easily be able to figure out if there's like a possibility that will be accessible. If not, the EPUB or some of the other versions of formats that you can download files in, you can experiment, try to cut and paste, because you're right, going into the Canvas page, everything's going to be addressed. So I think getting it into Canvas is the number one option. If we can't, then it's like, well, okay, how can we make this accessible? And I'm wondering too, maybe we can ask Kelly the next time we do a workshop, if they have something in their office, a reader that does really good OCR. Because you're right, if you're using Adobe, sometimes you can't even get it to recognize the characters and the words and letters and stuff. So we really, I think, do need to double down on PDFs, I feel like, in the future. So perfect suggestion there. So we'll close. I know we've been going long. I did want to get this video done, so we'll close today. But just mention with the curriculum checklist, anything you see here, just take it with a grain of salt today. Because again, this is probably an old version, just because when I approved the class, this is what is currently available in eLumen. So let's hold off on more on the curriculum element with eLumen until we figure stuff out. Oh yeah, Justin. Hey.
So if I can chime in, I'm leaving my video off because just to help with the internet
No worries,
speed. But I believe the update for that is now a new DE addendum tab.
Oh wow. Okay.
Let me see if I can share my screen here.
That's what I thought. Maybe there was something new that I'm not even aware of. So
Give me 1 second. Let me.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
so I'm looking at now. This is not actual the eLumen workflow because it was going really slow for me too. There must be something going on with eLumen right now. But I just pulled up a course outline of record. This is for a new course I just got today that I'm reviewing.
Yeah.
So this is the most up to date. So you'll see there's a DE addendum here. And this is now an actual tab that you'll fill out, and it appears to be a bit different from the checklist that you have. Basically, it's asking you if the course can be taught online in any fashion. You answer in what way. I won't go through all of these because they're quite lengthy, as you can see with the instructions. But basically, you'll follow answer these different questions. What I'd like to do is I want to skip down to, we're talking about accessibility today, so I just want to quickly skip down to where that is important, because you'll see you have to, put the hours and units in here and stuff. But if you skip down to about question 4 and onward, you'll see that these start pertaining to questions of accessibility.
Oh, okay.
You actually get the words accessibility standards right here, and number 4. So there'll be a drop down. You select anything that applies. If you select other on any of these, you just have to add a little comment below. But basically, this is what I wanted to point out about keeping accessibility in mind. Again, it's literally part of the instructions. So think about that in that sense. And, for your students and different accessibility needs, selecting, various aspects there. Also, if you go on to 5, some of these are incomplete, but 5, 6, 7 and onward, it's the same idea about selecting different methods that will be important for different types of students, and having the class delivered in an electronic or distance fashion rather than face to face. So maybe Kelly shared the accommodation form she went over today and had the guideline. Maybe use that as a checklist for yourself when you're looking at these drop downs. So some of these you might not select, but you would have selected them had you had accessibility in mind. So I would recommend using something like her accommodation form or that guideline PDF again as sort of a checklist for yourself. Every class is different. A math class will differ from a different type of class in social studies or something. So keep that in mind. When you get down, especially to question 7, there's actually a section more specifically on accessibility. Now, I just asked you to click yes or no. I think that corresponds to that checkbox you were talking about.
Okay, right.
So it's asking whether these 11 points pertain. And if you look at it, it gives you this. It's kind of hidden in instructions, but it tells you to put this into your URL and open this up. And if you do that, it opens up this checklist right here. It's a Word file. And there's 11 requirements. So basically, you should be able to answer yes to all of these. They're all about accessibility, about vision. You'll notice blind student.
That's the same one I was showing, yeah.
Yeah, so it has to do with vision and hearing mostly. But have a look at that. And then if you can answer yes to all those, you click yes.
Okay.
All content is accessible. If you click no, then you have to explain in this box.
Okay.
Something I'm noticing is on all courses I've been getting lately for new or modifications, a lot of people are just putting yes, because if you hit no, you have to explain.
Yeah.
And it just makes me wonder if we're actually thoroughly, if anybody's reading these instructions and actually looking at that and going down. So I just want to encourage everyone to actually do that, because this could come back to bite you later if you just hit yes, and then you actually do have a student in your class that has hearing or vision needs, and you haven't prepared for it, right? So I just wanted to emphasize that. And then real quick, I'll end with this. We also have another new tab. This is an even newer tab.
Oh yeah.
for diversity, equity, and inclusion methods, or DEIM report. And this kind of overlaps with this DE as well. Now, notice this diversity, equity, inclusion. It talks about, it'll mention things like racial, socioeconomic, cultural. I feel like we could have added verbiage to this that has to do with accessibility, or previously we were using the term disability, but to use more positive language, accessibility. So I want to encourage everyone to think about SAS for this as well.
Yeah.
Think about, what I just mentioned about visual and hearing accommodation needs, and answer that as well. This one has not been filled out for this course. Actually, I notified the instructor to fill this out, but so I don't have an example for you here, but this is brand new. But I just want to encourage you again, even though you don't have, SAS listed on here in these lists, to be sure that everyone is including that as well.
Yeah.
And also you can see here with this question, it overlaps heavily with the distance education part we just looked at, right? So if we had a lot of accessibility questions as part of the DE addendum, then naturally you'd think that when it's talking about online platforms and learning activities, that this is sort of reiterating that as well. So this is probably where you would want to focus on SAS, right? Student accessibility services. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. So I think that those are the updates maybe you were referring to.
Yeah, I'm just glad that's a great revamp of that. And just to be clear, from what you understand, the whole curriculum committee, probably the form we just saw, they will review that. It's probably not going to go through other committees.
Yeah, actually, I as of today, I am reviewing the DE committee steps just for now. Yeah, so because there were some questions on that, and so I was notified that I should just go ahead and review those. So this has actually been something I've been doing all morning before our meeting.
Okay.
I was going through and looking at all the ones that were at that stage and double checking. There was a few I had to send back or follow up with the faculty member on, but I've been looking at those very carefully all morning. So I'll probably be doing that going forward until further notice.
Okay, cool. And the other thing I'm going to say, because it was maybe if you're watching this video confusing, the explanation when I showed you the course outline of record for archaeology, and I downloaded that form, obviously that's the old form. What Justin just showed us on video is on the shared screen is the new version. So what will happen is all faculty at the college, typically department chairs, you do an update to the core, to the curriculum outline of record. It's required by Title V State Education Code. So once I do the new update for Anthro 101, that version I showed you that I had trouble finding the zip file, that'll go away. And I love that they're doing this tab, because I have to say from personal experience, I hated having this like Word document floating around, and finding it and filling it in, and the committee would have to look at it in the old days. I think it's so smart that we're putting this on eLumen. And so eventually, I believe that, Justin, that download of that file I showed, that'll be gone once we do all the Title V updates of all our classes. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I'd have to go back into eLumen and check, but I don't recall seeing that on any of the new ones. So they might have already taken it out of the program because the tab essentially replaces that anyway. So it's really impossible to miss now. It's literally, these are 2 extra steps you have to get through before you advance your workflow onto me. So they're really hard to miss, but I think because they're so new, a lot of people are not used to filling them out. I've been getting them just blank, and eLumen allows you to submit it to me to move it on. But although you haven't filled it out, but just know that I'm reviewing these, and I'll usually send you an email or maybe add comments and send it back to make sure that those get filled out, because we really want to make sure these are getting filled out now on everything coming through, whether it's a modification or a new course.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, great. And I mentioned to Justin, he's going to obviously get settled, moving here and finishing up some other teaching duties. But once he is settled, we'll definitely do a workshop on eLumen. We can invite Mark to that, who is our SLO coordinator, because eLumen, if you're not used to it, it has some things you have to figure out. So I just want to, again, make sure that, kind of like with Michael's first workshop today, if we can answer some of the basic questions on these videos and workshops, then maybe it'll save both of you in your respective roles answering that 50 times. Maybe you only answer it 15 times. So, Justin, once you're settled, we can totally set up a workshop in June or whenever you want to do it, invite Mark and kind of go through eLumen. Because I always say once you start working with eLumen, it's not as intimidating as it looks. But if you first jump into it, it's it's a little different than navigating Canvas for sure, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of things you can easily miss, which I'm catching, and I'll contact the faculty member, and it's most of them are honest mistakes. They just didn't see it. So it's a little clunky, the system, but we'll all get there.
Great, awesome. Well, cool. Well, we've gone late. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I mean, I think it's really important. I wish Kelly or I would have mentioned it a long time ago about accessibility is, and this was 2-year-old data, but I'm sure it hasn't changed too much. Only 20% of students that need accommodations identify themselves. A lot of students, for whatever reason, do not identify or do not go to SAS. However, the ADA still represents students that have not gone and identified themselves. So if I needed accommodations, I don't go to SAS, and then it becomes a problem for me. The ADA will represent me in a court case against the college and possibly the instructor. And the ADA 2 years ago had an 85% win rate in those cases. The ADA pretty much wins every time they go to court. So that is why I've been so passionate. And one of the reasons why I've been so passionate about being proactive to accessibility issues rather than reactive, because you might find yourself in a hornet's nest before you didn't even know you were in one, kind of a deal. So it's very, 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 very important for that reason, and for the reason of equity as well for our students.
Absolutely.
That's precisely why I was emphasizing being proactive with those two tabs. Just be thorough and fill it all out and keep every type of student in mind. That's the whole point of diversity and inclusion. Don't just stop at socioeconomic and cultural. Think about SAS students, or like Michael was saying, even those that haven't filed with SAS, but still would be characterized as such, and to ensure that you're keeping everyone in mind when you're filling those out.
Agree 100% with all those statements. And again, like I said in my welcome video, we all have more to do, whether it's diversity, whether it's accessibility. So it's never like you're done, right? It's like, oh, you learn a new thing. And believe me, I think with all the trauma that's been coming out with via COVID and other events, the war in Ukraine, I think there's just a lot of collective trauma. So I would not be surprised if more students get tested and have accommodations, particularly at that realm of post-traumatic stress. And one thing we didn't talk about, it's not quite disability, but kind of is, or accessibility. It's the whole trigger warning in classes. So again, you may want to, like if you have a student who has experienced trauma related to war or violence, and you're showing a film in your class about the conflict in Ukraine, or just today, that horrible shooting in Brooklyn in a subway, just seeing some of those images can be triggers for conditions. And so I just caution us also to make sure that if you teach a subject, if you're teaching math, right, you're not going to get a sort of trigger from the quadratic equation other than it's hard, which was my case, not being a good math student in college. But if you see an image of violence or whatever, or, Justin teaching religious studies, and something triggers a student, it's just really important to put that up there, because I feel like we sometimes forget about that sensitive content can have a psychological, and Michael, as a psychologist, knows this, can have an impact. If you're talking about addiction, whenever I'm not an addiction study specialist, but with instructors who do group counseling or things like that online, on Zoom, I'm always saying, make sure you put in trigger warnings and talk about safety, so that if a student shares something like Kelly was saying, and that gets recorded, you do not want that being a public document. And I don't know, Michael, if you have thoughts on that from a psychology perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in psychology, since I taught psychology for a long time, and talking about social psychology, sometimes if you want to give your students the best education possible, you do have to talk about those issues. And it is very important to include everywhere you possibly can. That kind of goes back to those announcements. Even in them, hey, we're going to talk about some very sensitive things. This is going to be the topic. If you do not want to participate in this, I will come up with another, more resources, a different assignment, whatever it is. But it's what we get paid for, is to adapt things for 100% of our students, not make sure that 70% of them are okay with what we're doing, and that's above half. We don't do that. It's 100% or nothing kind of a deal. So yes, definitely reaching out if it does need to be talked about. Really giving students that option of opting out for certain things.
Yeah, I feel like we may want to do in the future a workshop on trigger warnings, because that's something, just looking at Kelly's list or what Justin showed on the curriculum outline, that's something that happens in a class, very specific to the instructor. So, and if maybe some people new to teaching social science or humanities, religious studies don't know about that, and then a student comes to our class and something does trigger them, that's an accommodation that the instructor wasn't even aware of. So I feel like we may want to do some workshops on that, because I just feel like watching, I have to sometimes just turn off the TV because there's just so much violence that you see just on the nightly news. And if a student has dealt with that, PTSD or whatever, one of our veterans, it can really send them in a direction that's potentially really dangerous. So I feel like that's another accommodation, if you will, that's out there that we should just be aware of. So maybe we'll plan a workshop on that topic in the future. So yeah. Well, let's close this. Thank you to Michael Miguel, Justin Dainshaman, Kelly Greiner for both workshops. I know Michael was in the first one, but just giving us so much important information. You also can now associate a face with a contact. So if you have any concerns, the people to reach out to on campus, including myself. So thank you all for listening today. Cool. Okay, so that's going to be it. Thank you both for your time extending this into the 1 o'clock hour. So just really appreciate it. So yeah, awesome.